Have you ever had a road to Damascus experience? I wonder if there are a few people here who might have had some sort of road to Damascus experience, one of those life-changing experiences that are so dramatic, so powerful, that afterwards you see everything in a fresh and different way. Has your view of the world ever been disrupted or disordered by some sort of event to the extent that the old categories, the old ways of thinking just don't seem to fit anymore? And I know that a handful of people here probably have had some sort of road to Damascus experience. I'd love to hear your story over coffee sometime if you are one of those people. When it comes to Paul, if I could have the slide on the screen, when it comes to Paul, formerly called Saul, and I'll refer to him as Saul throughout, they're the same person, his Damascus road experience could be summed up in these three words: order, disorder, reorder. And we've already looked at those in the all-age talk and throughout the service. Mike's introduced how they feature in normal life, growing up, at school, etc. And so we don't necessarily have to have a Damascus road experience to find this pattern play out: order, disorder, reorder. And it's interesting because once you start seeing this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. We might think of the seasons, the order of summer, through to the disorder of autumn, winter, back through to the reorder of spring. Unless you live in Britain, of course. And it's just disorder all the time, isn't it? You know what I mean anyway. So in music, we've just been playing some music. We've been singing some music together. We find this pattern as well: order, disorder, reorder. In all our songs this morning, there was a tonic note or chord, which then we went to some tension in that same key, and so it became a bit disordered, and then we got back somehow to that same tonic chord or note. So every song we've had this morning, there's been some sort of element of order, disorder, reorder. In our Bibles, we find this pattern as well. Throughout the Bible, there's the story of creation, which Mike referenced in the beginning, creation, and then the fall, where things start going wrong, and then the reorder of new creation, the redemption of all things in Christ. In the Old Testament, we find the order of giving the law, and then Israel's failure to keep the law, disorder, and then Jesus coming to fulfill the law and even giving his disciples a new commandment. Even in the person of Jesus, Jesus lived, Jesus died, Jesus rose again. Order, disorder, reorder. So this pattern is everywhere. When it shows up in life, it's related to something that we have a bit of an uneasy relationship with. Change. Who likes change? Hands up if you do like change. Who doesn't like change? Interesting. That's about 40-60% kind of 40% like it, 60% don't. And if you're someone who's not too keen on change, you're probably going to find this a little bit uncomfortable. Order, disorder, reorder, a little bit intimidating. Especially when we find that there's actually no direct flight from order to reorder. You always have to go through some sort of disorder. And all three of these boxes are important, even if we do tend to sometimes get stuck in usually the first or second box, order or disorder. We'll get into that more. And this is why I'm preaching on this, really, because sometimes we get stuck. And we struggle to move on, struggle to move forward. And when we get stuck, what sometimes happens, often it happens actually, we start vigorously defending our box, as it were, order or disorder, when actually God's calling us to move on. God's calling us to go forward. And this is exactly where we find Saul in that reading we just had read by Steve. That's exactly where we find him in Acts 9. So you can follow it along in the Bible if you have it, but no worries if not. So at the beginning of that story, Saul is, quote, still breathing out murderous threats. That's so expressive language. Breathing out murderous threats. Saul was a Pharisee who was authorized to arrest members of the early church. He had authority, he had purpose when it came to this kind of persecution. And he even approved of the killing of Stephen, one of the early church leaders. We could call Saul then a hunter of Christians. A hunter of Christians. Saul saw the early church as a kind of dangerous deviation from his Jewish faith, his Jewish law. He was zealous. He would stop at nothing to uphold the order of the law as he saw it. So he was stamping out this young Jesus movement. He was defending the first box, the box of order. Let's just unpack that box a little bit, talk about the first box, because order is not necessarily bad at all. In fact, order is necessary for life. Without order, we don't learn impulse control. Without order, we can feel insecure in this world. If you're someone whose upbringing or family of origin was disordered, you often find that in order to move on, you have to go back to order before you can move on. Order tells us that we have a home in this world. Order tells us that life is, on the whole, okay. If you believe in God, that God is okay. That God is good. We are good. That's what order brings. Order helps us find our place in the world. And yet, like all good things, when we push it too far, it can get distorted. Order can get pushed too far. And if we stay at order too long, we begin to see life as this kind of closed system. We think, oh, if only everyone saw things as I saw them. If only everyone saw God as I see God. If only everyone obeyed the rules as I think they should obey the rules. Then everything would be okay and life would be great, and life is black and white. There is no grey. Anyone familiar with this? I once went to a church where they honestly believed that they were the only church, this was as a child, that they were the only church in the area that believed the right thing in the whole area. Doctrine or church teaching was a closed system for that church. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted that. I actually wanted that. There was a time in my life when I wanted that. When I was a teenager, I wanted this big book called Systematic Theology by an author I won't mention. And I never got the book because it was pretty pricey for a boy who only earns £14.50 a week delivering papers. But this book that I really wanted, it had kind of gained, it had become a bit of an authority in certain circles. And I wanted it because I wanted to know the right answers. You know, the right answers. The right answers about God. The right answers about how to read the Bible, the right answers about life and how we should live. And I knew this book, Systematic Theology, would help me with that. And I wanted to learn the whole thing and then be at the ready to defend any of those answers that I'd come up with. Now, I never got the book. And I'm actually quite glad now, because I might have uncritically accepted some doctrines. For example, in the book was this doctrine that women shouldn't preach, which we heard a bit about earlier, the doctrine that there is hierarchy in the Trinity, and that there is such a thing as eternal conscious torment. They were all in the book, and actually it turned out that none of these were doctrines that I've ever embraced in my whole life, so I'm glad that I didn't read the book and start vigorously defending order. But looking back, I realised that what I wanted was that order. I wanted to know what was the orthodox way, what was the right way of believing. I wanted to know who's got it right, who's got it wrong, and I wanted to be on that side. And that's pretty black and white, but that's what I wanted. People who remain kind of steadfastly in that order box will generally think that they have the best belief system, the best country, and that their family is the only family that does Christmas right. Some of you are thinking, yeah, but we are the only family that does Christmas right. Let's not even go there. If we think about churches for the moment, and you will know there's many people who've got any kind of church background, not everyone here has, but if you've got church background, you'll know that churches can get stuck at this order phase. They will maintain, and they will maintain, and they will maintain. Is this familiar to anyone? Is this ringing any bells at all? Okay, they maintain the culture, maintain the style of preaching, maintain the music, maintain the activities, even if there are numerous reasons why they should have stopped long ago. These churches will rarely let their experience of the world kind of touch their theology or touch their way of doing things. If it did touch, then it would shape them to the core, their identity to the core. People who want to stick with that order box will either, like Saul in the story, actually kind of resist it head on, with arguments, with hostility, possibly even violence. The other option, which is perhaps more common, is put the earplugs in, hold tight, protect themselves from the world, and block out everything that doesn't adhere to the system. Unless, of course, Jesus throws the system into disorder. He wouldn't do that, would he? Wouldn't do that. Jesus is not like that, is he? Jesus is not revolutionary, is he? Jesus sustains the system, doesn't he? The order, right? Well, in our story, Jesus doesn't keep the order going, actually throws it into disorder. There's this light from heaven, flashed around Saul and his companions. Saul fell to the ground and he heard this voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Saul asks, "Who are you, Lord?" The voice says, "I am Jesus who you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city and you'll be told what you must do." And when Saul opened his eyes, he was blind. For 3 days he was blind and he ate nothing, he drank nothing. Welcome to disorder. And Saul's disorder is a multifaceted disorder. One, Saul finds out that the Jesus who he thought was dead is actually alive and is powerful. He calls him Lord. Number two, Saul had assumed that God was on his side. But in a flash of light, he's found out that God is on the side of the persecuted. God is on the side of the weak. God is on the side of his fledgling church that he also calls his body. Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting me?" Jesus takes it personally. Number three, Saul is told to go into the city and await further instructions. So it sounds like Saul's going to end up with a whole new mission. Number four, Saul is blind. Number five, Saul is hungry. Number six, Saul is thirsty. There's six of the aspects of Saul's disorder. So it's considerable disorder. It's painful. It's uncomfortable. But this is the necessary suffering. That's exactly what Saul needs to move beyond the safety of order. Because he can't go from persecuting Jesus straight to preaching Jesus. There's no direct flight from order to reorder. He has to go through some disorder. And the same goes for us. If we're addicted to order, it's going to take some sort of crisis. It's going to take something that we just can't resolve with our own strength, or can't resolve with our own black and white thinking, to move us beyond that first box and start asking questions that will stretch us. If the first box is more about having the right answers, the second box is more about asking the right questions. There's loads of questions in this story. Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting me?" Saul asks, "Who are you, Lord?" It's just confusion. There's questions, and they don't really get answers particularly. But when we're in disorder, we realise something. We realise, perhaps I don't have all the answers. Perhaps I need to revisit some of the things I thought were so blatantly obvious to everyone. Perhaps questions are okay. Perhaps questions are okay here, in church. If you're in a place of disorder now, if things are a bit crazy, things are a bit messy, it's okay. If you're experiencing disorder now, you don't necessarily have to move on too quickly or kind of mask the pain. You don't have to distract yourself constantly from what's going on. You don't have to even ask, "Why me? Why me?" Instead, there could be a whole other set of questions you could begin to think about. I'll just gently put this forward. How about asking, what can I learn from this disorder that's going on in my life? What can I learn? What can this pain teach me? What can this suffering teach me? What questions does it force me to ask about the way the world works? Where is God in this? And what is God drawing out of this situation? You could ask, how can this experience of disorder shape me into a more Christ-like person? I remember a season of my life, I was between the age of 18, 19, this was when I was at the thermometer factory, and it was quite a year of disorder, and I'll kind of go for the year. In November, I actually experienced the sadness of being turned down for ministerial recognition interviews. And the reason was because I hadn't been a member of my church for 2 years, so I couldn't even start the interview process of going forward for Baptist ministry and being trained for Baptist ministry. So I was turned down for that, and I felt a lot of rejection, even though it was about a kind of admin issue, really. I hadn't been a member for 2 years. But then in December, my lung collapsed randomly, and I spent December with breathing issues. And I remember trying to sing carols at church, and I was only able to sing the first verse and the last verse because I was so breathless. That's all sorted now. But then 6 months later, I got beaten up on Grand Avenue, and I've told that story in another sermon, so I won't go into that here. And then in the September of that year, I then went to theological college and began this kind of deconstruction where I started questioning, what I believe and why do I believe it, and in the hope that I could reconstruct that theology as well with God's help and with God looking to God in all of that. Now, I won't go into details on that year, but I asked some big questions about who I was, who God is, what the world is like, and why I believed what I believed. And a lot of it was painful, and a lot of it was a bit uncomfortable, but I found it all very humbling in the end, and I think that's something that I take away from it. I believe that at best, disorder can help us to cultivate humility, realise we haven't got the answer, haven't got it all sorted, and just come to God with trust. Saul's story started with him hurtling towards Damascus with murderous threats on his lips, breathing out murderous threats. But then after meeting Jesus, I love this, he gets led by the hand into Damascus. What a change. From that forceful energy going forward to him being gently led by the hand into Damascus because he was blind. Before we move on to that final box, reorder, and consider what reorder might look like, I think it's important to recognise that people and churches can get stuck in this second box, disorder, just as much as they can get stuck in the first box, order. And for some people, they might say, my idea of order is that there is no order, and don't you dare try and put order on me, because I've been hurt by that before. And sometimes for these people, cynicism can run the show, skepticism can run the show, and it can get unhealthy. They can become the driving forces, especially if you've experienced a lot of hurt. That can be the case. People who are at disorder can ask great questions, lots of questions, but they can get this is the possibility, that they can get just as militant and just as stagnant about their questions as order people get about their right answers. Imagine this. Imagine if Saul wasn't led into Damascus, but then he stayed on the road, and he grew bitter, and more and more and more critical. Unable to go back to his zeal for the law, but unable to move forward with humility. That could have been the case for him, if it were not for what happened next in the story. So let me just go through this really, really quickly. So Saul gets led by the hand into Damascus. He's still blind, he's still not eating, he's still not drinking. Meanwhile, a believer called Ananias gets a vision of Jesus. Jesus calls him to go see Saul, lay his hands on him so that his sight might be restored. Ananias, he's not too sure about this because he's heard of Saul. He knows Saul is the hunter of Christians. But Jesus says, go, because Saul is his chosen instrument to preach to the Gentiles and to the people of Israel. So Ananias goes, places his hands on Saul. Saul's sight returns. He gets up, is baptized, and after taking some food, he regains strength. The end of the story. Now, this is a great example of reorder, I think. A great example of reorder, because only in reorder can paradox exist. Only in reorder can opposites collide. And that's exactly what's going on here. The persecutor and the persecuted come together as brothers. Ananias actually says to Saul, brother Saul. Saul receives help from the very kind of person he'd set out to Damascus to persecute, to arrest. And perhaps the most profound collision of opposites in this story is the way, and you hear about it as you go through Acts, but the way that Saul started off as a persecutor of Christians, but ended up preaching Christ. The reorder box, the reorder box. And in this reorder box, everything belongs. Everything has its place. Neither Saul nor Ananias feel the need to vigorously defend any box because they've come to believe that Jesus is Lord, and that opens up this more generous and more spacious place for them both. Saul will come to see that his Jewish background has a place. And so does his newfound faith in Jesus. It has a place. Even his sufferings have a place because through it he shares in the sufferings of Christ. In reorder, everything belongs. In reorder, everything has a place. So where does that leave all of us? And I'm coming into land with this. Where does that leave us? Again, I offer this gently. I believe Reorder is a great place to be. I believe Reorder is a fantastic place to be. I think it's characterised by a generosity of spirit. You're not trying to catch people out anymore. You're not trying to demonise people. You're not trying to polarise the conversation. In fact, in life, everything's a gift. You receive everything as a gift and with thanksgiving. You know that death is part of life. You know that weakness is part of strength. You know that failure is part of victory, that it all has a place. You don't avoid the disorder, you don't avoid the crises, but you look to them to teach you and move you forward. You're not dogmatic, and yet you believe a whole lot. In fact, your faith just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger because you love the scripture and you love the Christian tradition even more than ever before because you're not feeling the need to vigorously defend them. You're seeing actually new layers of meaning in them that you didn't see before. You seek to understand people before you make yourself understood. That's a reorder characteristic. You don't compare yourself to others all the time. You don't judge people all the time. People see you as wise, and yet you're like a child, embracing simplicity and trusting God for everything, like a small child with their parents. Have I just described you? Have I just described you? Well, I wasn't describing me because I'm still on the journey, but I know where I want to be, and I realise that from time to time, I'm going to have to embrace disorder. Embrace disorder so that God can continue to continue his work of grace within me. So as I come to close, I just want you to be honest with yourself and consider, where am I? Where am I here with these three boxes? Order, disorder, reorder, and dare I ask God to move me on, wherever he wants me. I believe he will, because he really does make a difference in our lives. He really can change everything for us. Let's pray.